This podcast is intended to be kind of an overview of the TI-84 Plus calculator. It's a lot like the TA-83 Plus edition, just there's a few differences. A lot of the things that I'm going to show you on the TI-84 are going to be the same for the TI-83. So just kind of a quick overview of some of the things, some of the functions, some of the buttons. If you wanted to enter in a function to look at its graph, you would want to go to y equals, and that's the very top left of the screen. And you can input any function you wanted to, such as 3. And if you need to put a variable, this key right here has different options, but we typically just select the first one, which is x, 3x, and then maybe plus 2. So that's an example of how to put in a certain function and where you'd find the x key at, where x or y equals is. Another thing you might do when you graph a function, or let me change this function a little bit. Now when I graph this function, I get kind of a partial view of the function, but I don't get the whole function. You should know that if you are looking at a quadratic or some function that has a power of x, that you have a parabola. And a parabola is going to be a function that has that U shape to it. And so I don't see the bottom of this parabola. I can use the window key to adjust my window to be able to take a look at it. I can also use my zoom key. If I hit zoom, it's talking about, you know, the window screen, how I want to zoom. I could zoom in, I could zoom out. Those are some keys we'll use a lot. 6 is standard view. That's the view we're in now. We'll use that a lot too. Sometimes you'll be looking at a graph on a graphing calculator. When you pick it up after you've already worked a problem or after someone else has worked a problem and your graph is off, you would want to start out in the standard viewing screen, 6. You have 7, the trigonometry window, which changes your x and y axis to more trig friendly values. What's some others you might? And zoom fit is probably one of the most widely used, because whenever you have a function like the one we have, when we look here, our graph isn't fitting. And so instead of going in and manually adjusting the window, so when you hit the window key, you have your x minimum, your x maximum, your scales, your y minimum, your y maximum. You can go in and manually adjust that window to see your function, but you might not know where to start. And so when you don't know where to start, you can always do zoom fit or zoom 0, because it's the choice 0 there. And by doing that, that gives you a better picture. Now we can see the bottom of our graph. And if I needed to see it a little bit more, well, I can think about it and say, okay, well, if I wanted to now, zoom fit gave me a decent look at it, not a great look. If I wanted to see a little bit below the bottom there, you should be able to think through this and say, well, if I made my y negatives go down a little bit further on my window, that would help me out. So if I go to my window, my y minimum is at negative 26, and my y maximum is at this big 315. And if I wanted to bring that vertex of my parabola into view a little bit better, maybe I can go down and make my y minimum, let's say maybe negative 100. And since I'm making the y minimum negative 100, maybe I want to make my y maximum 100, and that'll make that view a little bit more symmetrical there. And if I graph that now I've brought my vertex into much more manageable situation that I can work with it. So that would then be how to do that. The trace key here, it has the biggest thing you would use this trace key for is if you hit second trace, there's a lot of things you can find. You can find the value of any x where y is a certain number. 2, you can find the zeros, which is another word for roots or x-intercepts. That's interchangeable word there. 0 is an x-intercept. You can find the minimum or the maximum. So if we look at the graph we have, this graph, this parabola has a minimum value. Because if I keep going up this parabola to the right, I'm going off to positive infinity. If I keep going up this parabola to the left, it goes up again to positive infinity. So this bottom here, this vertex of my parabola is a minimum. How could I find that minimum using the calculator? Well, I hit second, trace, and right there number 3 is a minimum. So I hit 3. And so I can actually use this to find that value. It's saying left bound, so that means go just a little bit to the left of where you think the minimum is and then hit enter. And now it's saying right bound. That means go a little bit to the right of where you think the minimum is and hit enter. And then finally it says guess. Just hit enter on that. And then it tells you where that minimum is. That minimum is that ordered pair where that point is, right there at negative 0.667, comma, negative 26.33 repeating. So that maybe that's how you would use that function. Some more things when you hit second trace. You have some calculus and pre-calculus stuff down here. Probably won't use it much. We will use 5 a lot in Algebra 2, math models, pre-calculus, Algebra 1. A lot of times you want to find the intersection of 2 functions or 2 lines or something like that. Okay, going through here some more. If you go back and we have our function in y equals, sometimes you might get asked this question on a tax test. It might say, on the given function, 3x squared plus 4x minus 25, which of the following points lie on this function? And so instead of sitting there wondering how you would do that algebraically, if you know how to use your calculator, you can say, oh, all I have to do is put that function in y equals, and I can hit second, graph, and that brings up my table. And these are all ordered pairs that lie on the function, and you can go down through there and see if the answer choices match up. And even if you had no idea of how to actually do the algebra to find that answer, if you know how to use this calculator, you could get that answer. Real quick, the alpha key allows you to type letters, which sometimes we use, not very often. We have a stat key that we can use. If you hit stat, the first choice gives you edit, and if you hit enter there, that allows you to actually go in. I can clear these values out. It allows you to actually go in and enter in points. So let's say you have a tax question and it says, given such and such points, can you write the equation of the line? And maybe the points were 1, 2, and maybe you had 3, 4, and maybe it just gave you those 2 points, and it wants you to write the equation of the line. So if you put the x values in L1 and the y values in L2, you can write that equation by hitting stat, scrolling right to calc. Well, first, before you would do that, you would have to try to figure out what kind of equation it looks like. So if it was a line, maybe they specifically said a linear equation, write the equation of the line and given 2 points. You would scroll right to calc, and you see your choice for number 4 is linear regression. And then hit enter, and hit enter again. Notice that it comes up with y equals ax plus b. You're probably more used to seeing y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope, but now a is the slope, and b is still the y-intercept. So my equation would be y equals, a is 1, so 1x plus 1. And so that's another way of using your calculator. Lots of things to do there. Quickly, right here is your, let me clear my screen. Right here is your x squared key. So if I need to square any number, say I want to know what 7 squared is, there's 7 squared. And we know that that's 49. If I wanted to know what the square root of something is, I would hit second and then x squared, because the little blue square root right above the x squared key, and that brings up my square root radical there, and I could do maybe the square root of 169 and hit enter, and that gives me my answer, which is 13. We have a logarithm, natural logs. Probably won't use that too much for tax stuff for sure. You will use that in Algebra 2 and Pre-Cal and beyond. You have the stow key, which allows you to store certain values in for variables. We'll talk about that more later. You have 3 trig functions here: sine, cosine, and tangent. You also have their inverses right above by hitting second sine. This little to the power of -1 means inverse. That's actually sine's inverse. You might use that a little bit in pre-cal. Then you have, your parentheses and your regular functions here: divide, multiply, subtract, add, and stuff. You know where that's at. And so this is just a little bit of an overview of some things maybe you didn't know about the calculator. And if you didn't know anything about the calculator, it'll kind of get you started.